Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is the High Dragon's Breath Bow Wow, coming back at you with another Archon's Armory. Today we'll be starting another video, but this time on minor Xenos weapons. Now, this is going to be a lot of theories, a lot of yapping, and a lot of approximation because we don't have a lot of information on many of these factions, but I will do my best for a double upload. So, let's get to it with the Scythor Fiends. These are crystal organic psi-reactive monsters found in the Ghoul Stars by the Exorcists. They are essentially a walking crystile beast that are psi-reactive or otherwise psychically active. They do have their little arm spines here that are essentially elongated fingers that they can stab you with, but the cool thing that they do is that they can become the Stalker Glass Anomaly. They can literally break themselves up into a gestalt hive mind of the soul of the creature that are encased within thousands of tiny blade-like crystals, and then they can shred somebody and then reform themselves. This is horrifying, and I thought it was just really cool that they are essentially a stalker anomaly that moves around the Ghoul Stars and made its own little empire. Now, there are two known things about these guys. They have stealthy little fortresses that they can disappear into, either by hiding in the walls or disappearing entirely, and they have crystalline stealth frigates, so they can apparently be very, very difficult to keep a hold of, as they are literally like psi-reactive glass. Like I said, we're going to be moving through these with some speed. The Dracoliths. Lore and background, these are another crystal alien race, and they are a sub-empire group that has cropped up from time to time and essentially tried to take over Imperial worlds. The one big thing that we know about them is actually pretty interesting. They have a crystal laser weapon similar to the Decimator Storm Laser. Now, I have here a Decimator and two different versions of the Decimator Storm Laser, or pretty much the same thing, just from different angles. This is essentially a high-grade multi-laser that the Inquisition at least believes was hybridized by these crystal aliens from Dark Mechanicus technology, which is very interesting because not only does it give rise to the theory that the Dark Mechanicus are messing around with Xenotech just as much as they are messing around with Chaos Tech, but also that other lesser Xenos species in the galaxy might be gleaning technology from the Dark Mechanicum, which is a very interesting concept. And here you can just see something akin to that, but these guys don't have that much lore, in hell, they don't even have a lot of art of them. So let's move on to one that has a little bit more lore and some serious yapping behind it, the Grell. Now, you might be immediately asking, what is that picture over on the right? I thought that was a Bargacy, or I thought that was some other Xenos species. This is essentially what the Grell look like, in my opinion. There's no actual canon art of them that we know of. They are a chaos-worshipping Xenos, or at least they worship the voices in the warp, or the void warp voices. They worship the gods, essentially, for lack of a better term, and they have a very interesting bit of lore. Now, in the modern lore, what they are best known for is the Night Lord Demon Prince Veskagar, who, upon the beginning of his ascension, helped out the remnants of a Grell species group within the Sabbat worlds. Important thing there, within the Sabbat worlds, he helped them out by killing a bunch of Grey Knights for them, and in exchange, they gave him a particular prize. Now, these Grey Knights had been killing a bunch of the Grell and exterminating them while they were trying to keep their species alive. And Veskagar, in exchange for the patronage of these chaos-worshipping Xenos and their assistance technologically, went and killed all of the Grey Knights, and as the Grell requested, plucked out their eyeballs and presented them as trophies. Now, the Grell took these and were very pleased with them. And what did they offer the Night Lord in exchange? Well, they offered him psychoactive, so psychically active, torture devices. Now, it was claimed that these are entirely Xenos-produced weapons, aka the Grell have a unique technology of these psi-active or psi-reactive weapons that in the days of Veskagar, which is long after the Sabbat Worlds Crusade, it is merely a torture technology. However, the Grell have an interesting tie-in with a certain other story that I'd like to talk about. I am Archon. I will talk about the Sabbat Worlds Crusade at this moment. Now, the arms of the Grell, like I should say here, they probably do use some modified version of auto weapons. They are larger than humans, so I'd put them, standing tall. They'd probably be somewhere around 6-7 feet tall. They are hunched over a little bit, but they're also very bulky. They almost look like a fleshy whale. I assume that their, fascination with eyes is probably in relation to their own ocular difficulties. You can see this gentleman has a lot of modifications just to allow him to see in low light, so they probably have pretty bad eyesight, is my theory, and they kind of take out their revenge for having bad eyesight by asking Vreskagar to rip the eyes out of the Grey Knights. But the important thing is that apart from their arms, that connection, that idea that the Grell are an ancient, chaos-worshipping species that also at one point had an empire that colluded with humanity. Now, there's only one empire that is both chaos-aligned and colluded with humanity within the Sabbat worlds, and that is the original inhabitants of the Sanguinary worlds. That includes the Gurans and the various other Xenos and human empires that took over and controlled areas in the name of the gods during and after the Great Crusade that resulted in the Saints' Crusade. Now, we know that the death of Saint Sabbat, or the momentary death of her soul and body that vaulted her back into non-existence in the warp until she was essentially reincarnated by her body's disentombment and the formulation of a new vessel for her, a very complicated process. But why was she there in the first place? What killed this greater demon of the God Emperor? Well, nobody really knows. Nobody really knows what finally puts an end to her. We know that Chaos Space Marines do fight her. We know that humans and their various Chaos allies, including Psykers, do fight her. We know that species like the Grell also fight her. But it doesn't seem clear what killed her on Harkalon. But we do have one indication that the Grell were there. Or at least that they were fighting on the same battlefield with their human slaves, and some human allies who had fallen back from the rest of the Chaos Empire that was in that area. And we know that later, during the modern 40k, the Grell are still capable of making horrible, psi-active or psycho-reactive torture weapons. Now, the only detail that we have about the death of Saint Sabbat is that her death was brutal, and that the 9 holy wounds that she took during her fatal battle on Harkalon was what brought her to her final end. Now, what are the 9 holy wounds? What caused them, and why could she not be wounded before that? Because, of course, living saints are living for a reason. They are quite difficult to put down, as they are basically greater demons shoved into the body of a human being. And they are stable just barely. So, psychic weapons will work against greater demons, yes. However, a psychic torture weapon might not. So, my theory is that the 9 holy wounds are a product of the Grell technology, their psi-active weapons. And I'm not talking something like a force weapon here, or a demon weapon. No, we're talking on a total other scale. Because for the broken remnants, the last of their race, to still be able to produce more than 1,000 years later this basic version of their psychic torture weapons, and for them to impress Vreskagar to such a degree, and, of course, for the Grey Knights to pursue those Grell with such vehement hatred, they must be quite powerful, and that's only the remnant of what they were once able to do. Which means that the 9 holy wounds were probably caused by some truly apocalyptic levels of psychic chaos power that were able to finally put that bitch down. So, here is my evidence of what the 9 holy wounds tell us. We have no idea what they are, what description they are on her body, where they occurred, but we know that they at least were not minor wounds. How do we know this? Pater Sin. So Pater Sin is a blood-pact officer. He is essentially a father, a pater, of the Blood Pact. He works for them as a leader of men, and also as a sub-lieutenant of a type who isn't quite a magister, but works directly for Nadzibar and for the Gower after him. Pater Sin knows about the 9 holy wounds. The knowledge wasn't lost, because the first theory is, well, the knowledge is lost, and that's why we don't know about it. Pater Sin knows about the 9 holy wounds, and he recreates them on an Imperial Guardsman as a torture method. Now, how does he recreate them? Well, he takes a bolt drill Basically like a rock drill that you would use to drill a big old hole into like a core. You know, those long, twisty, 2.5 foot long drill bits. And he drills it into this man 9 times at different angles and heights in what he says is a perfect approximation of the 9 holy wounds that finally killed Saint Sabbat. So that, I think, goes along with the idea that these are brutal injuries inflicted with a horrifically damaging weapon. Again, psychoactive, highly psychically reactive, probably straight up chaos afflicted, because the Grell are a chaos worshipping species. So Pater Sin is the first example. The second one is Nadzibar, his actual preparation and his records of the campaign. Obviously, someone has to tell Pater Sin about this happening. They have to tell him about the 9 holy wounds. These are not universally known things. Even Imperials who make reference to the 9 holy wounds don't seem to understand what they are or how they were dealt. They just seem to understand that it happened somewhere at some time with something, and it resulted in their saint being slain. So, where does the information that Sin learns come from? My theory is that it's Nadzibar's records. Now, Nadzibar is not a warlord in a traditional sense. He is much more of a priest. He is a blood priest on Gura, and he is not leading the pact by name, but he is in charge of the Zhou Sanguinary as a whole, and the leader of the pact, the Gower, answers directly to him. So, in reality, he is leading the blood pact, but in name, he's only leading the Zhou Sanguinary. And in fact, he is a priest, which means that a Feral World priest would most certainly have the records of the Saints' Crusade, which means that it's very likely that Nadzibar would know much more about the 9 holy wounds, and he would probably know about the Grell as well. Because part of that record-keeping process, that, traditional history of writing things down, oral folklore, etc. on Feral Worlds would include things like, how did we get here? What happened to have us be here? And, let's be honest, Gura is not far off from the remains of Harkalon or Gar Baradon. They are relatively close, both within the Sanguinary worlds, both within the Red Storm, and it would be perfectly reasonable to say that the survivors of Harkalon, or the survivors of the Battle of Harkalon, or their allies, most certainly could have ended up being the forefathers of the Gurans, who eventually become the Guran Arcanate and the Blood Pact as an organized military force. So Nadzibar's records could absolutely point us towards that. The last one, I think, is Enoch Innocenti's fear. So Enoch Innocenti goes out of his way, as a Blood Pact Magister who comes from Gura, is built of Feral World stock, and probably knew Nadzibar personally, would have known the danger of the saint, would have known what she was. He goes so far out of his way to attempt every single type of process to try and kill her. Think of the assassins that he sends after her. He doesn't send human assassins. He doesn't send Pact Sons only. He doesn't even send Psykers. He sends Pater Sin with 2 Runt Psykers. That's a psychic option. That's what he goes for with him. And then he sends a Chaos Space Marine Dreadnought, just in case pure physical force will do the job. And then he sends 3 mentally bonded Loxodal, just in case he thinks that they can be a Xenos affectation. Something will work. And then he sends Saul, a Blood Pact sniper, just in case he needs to give an attempt at having a traditional way of killing her. But essentially, you could tell that he's freaking out. He's throwing everything at the wall, trying to find one vector by which he can kill the saint again. So, from his fear, from that panic, from that idea of, well, I don't have the Grell, I don't have this particular weapon, like, a psi-reactive weapon or a force weapon is not beyond the Blood Pact at all. They have plenty of power weapons and plenty of Psykers. So why is he freaking out? Why isn't he just recreating the 9 holy wounds with an existing weapon? Well, the answer is, he doesn't have that weapon. That weapon is in the hands of the Grell and probably long lost to time. Perhaps Nadzibar was seeking after it when he died. Perhaps he was seeking after it at some point, but then upon coming across the saint's corpse on Herodor, he might have not, or he might have stopped, or he might have believed he didn't need to be afraid of it anymore. But the fear that Enoch has after the saint has returned and Nadzibar has fallen is typified in the way that he goes after trying to assassinate her. And eventually, he goes himself. That's the most interesting to me, is that he fights the saint personally. He goes after her himself with his skull rack and all his chaos panoply, and he fights her power sword to power sword. And it's not an uneven fight. He actually has a pretty solid chance of at least wounding her, and I think that's his absolute last gasp. He's clearly terrified. He brings all of his life wards, all of his death brigade. He goes through the city and he literally performs as many rituals on the way up the steps to the saint as he possibly can. He's intentionally going through each section of the planet's population on the hive and slaughtering all of them just to empower himself to try and get up to the level where he believes that he can fight the saint. He's essentially knows he's going to his death, and like Nadzibar, he wants to go out fucking swinging. So that's the final example that I have that ties the Grell to the 9 Holy Wounds, is Enoch's fear as a result of Nadzibar's records. And we know about Nadzibar's records because where else would Pater sin, somebody who wasn't even born when this happened or anywhere close to when this happened, and probably isn't even from the same feral world, if I were to guess, in comparison to Nadzibar himself. So, that's the Grell. Sorry, that was a long one, but I had to get that out because that's one of my favorite theories, and I actually will use that for a lot of lore, and I am Nadzibar. I got the juice. I got the squeeze. I can tell you. The Hrud. They are creepy time manipulating. They have Sasak gas, or Sac gas, which is a field around them produced by their bodies and sometimes by their weapons that distorts time and space. Now, you might say, distorts time and space. What does that mean? Well, it means a lot of stuff. Sometimes it's really random, like it will accelerate, age people, or it will damage things, or it will literally rip you apart, shred you, shift you in your location. Effectively, their physical bodies are like a time anomaly. And they produce this Sac gas, or Sac gas, inside of their bodies. The other things that they have, the other weapons that they have, are plasma beamers. They call them fusils, but they are essentially similar to a hell pistol. It is a continuous beam, but instead of laser, it is plasma. So it is very hot, very high armor piercing, very deadly weapon, but a little bit archaic. You can see down here it's like big wood stocks, relatively large, like barrels and stuff, kind of crude looking, but very, very deadly. The Loxatl. These guys are another blood pact thing, which means, yeah, I am going to talk about them at length. So, the Loxatl are these kind of 8-foot to slightly over 10-foot long head to snout, lizard-like or monitor lizard-like creatures. They are very large. And even the juveniles can get up to 8 foot from snout to tail. They have relatively bad eyesight, as they are mostly made to be underwater. They have shimmers on their scales that they can use as like chemical electric sensing so that they can communicate with each other. They also do have the ability to use some level of human language. It's not great. It's kind of hissy and nasty. They can climb up walls. They are really good in water. They are fully aquatic. They're very muscly and strong. And in addition to that, they have big old claws and jaws, and they're very, very cool. They are a chaos breed. They don't necessarily worship chaos, but where do they always pop up? They pop up in the Sanguinary Worlds, the Eye of Terror, possibly, depending on what interpretation you want to have. I think that most of the ones in the Eye of Terror were probably killed by the Trader Legionaries before they realized they could use them. And then the Maelstrom Zone. That's the other place they pop up. There are other areas in the west where they pop up, but it's always around a chaos anomaly. In the Sanguinary Worlds, it's the Red Sun. It's the actual blood of the Sanguinary Worlds. In the Eye of Terror, it's the Eye, and in the Maelstrom, it's the Maelstrom Zone. It's the warp anomaly that seems to either attract them, but I don't think it attracts them because they don't find them anywhere else. I think what's more likely is that their nests, their kind of underwater breeding areas, and probably their young, require significant chaos energy or corruption in order to birth and gestate correctly. Now, again, this is just based on where they live. The other thing is that they will work with chaos forces as mercenaries. So they are a very chaos breed. They are chill with people who have chaos corruption. They have no issue working for them, essentially for more area to increase their numbers as a brood. And they do tend to be a matriarchal brood. The production and their mind impulse weapons. So, it's interesting. The weapons that they carry, the flechette blasters, seem to be of a Loxatl-specific design, aka, it is seemingly implied that they are the ones who make them. And now these aren't super complicated weapons, especially you can see how they're mounted here, these kind of tubes of filament, and then there's a projector either on the back or usually on the chest of the Luxotl, where they essentially spray out flechettes, whether it's a long string of them or a netting or some sort of interweaving of them. It's simply a metal sprayer from their body. And because they're climbing on walls and quadrupedal most of the time, they can go bipedal, and they can also use weapons, but generally they prefer these because it allows them to fire the weapon like a gimbal with a mind impulse. There's literally a wire going into their brain that lets them control the weapon. It is implied that they are the ones who can make this. Why? One, because it's so perfectly made for their architecture. It can work in water, it can work out of water. It can work on many different enemies, and it can be very effective against squishy infantry targets. Also, the mind impulse device, it does seem like it might work on humans, and I'll talk about that in a second, but it is very specifically made for them, at least when they have it. So it doesn't look like it's jerry-rigged up to them. It definitely looks custom-made for them. And whether it uses some part of their biology or whether it's purely mechanical is unclear. I think it could go either way. But the flechette blasters aren't their only options. There's also mention of blade sleeves or arm blades. Effectively, these would be like bracelets or like bracers, similar to what this gentleman has. This is a fan pick, but I think it was really interesting to see them actually have weapons and armor. Theoretically, something they could have. But again, because they're aquatic and because they use their chemoelectric kind of color sensing on their bodies to communicate silently, in addition to their growling and kind of hissing and stuff that they do, they can speak a little bit, but not great. They usually will not wear armor. The other thing about them, their eyes will change color depending on where they are. So if they're born in the Maelstrom, they will have blue eyes. Sometimes they'll have orange eyes, but the ones in the Sanguinary Worlds, they tend to have red or possibly orange eyes, depending on where they're born. But it tends to be, again, coordinating with the chaos corruption in the area. The arm blades, the kind of arm sleeves, they would probably be pretty similar to just an affectation of their dew claws. Probably something that pops out at the forearm here. Might help them climb, but more likely than not, it's just going to help them with their melee combat. And the other thing is their dew claws. You can see them here. It's this kind of velociraptor-like thumb claw. And then they also have big ones on the back of their legs that allow them to hook into material or over material, allowing them not only to climb, but the other really dangerous thing, I think, how the Luxotl hunt a lot of the time, like the alligator, monitor lizard kind of aggressive ambush/rundown predator they are, it is something where they'd be able to grab onto a person with their upper arms, chest, and head, and then basically kick them to death with their dew claws. Because they are enormous. They are like a 4-inch sickle claw on the back of their foot, and these guys are so muscly that they can effectively hook those into the lower portion of a body, like the stomach, and basically rip your intestines open with their legs. Almost like a frog kicking outward, except they're ripping your guts open with them. So, very brutal, very nasty. The flechette blasters themselves, again, they work in two different ways. Either they can fire a continuous stream of metal, similar to a monofilament weapon, or they seem to be able to fire a web of monofilament. Now, this is just, again, back and forth. Sometimes it works in a way that, like, it draws a straight line across a target. It isn't ballistic. It's just kind of like a kerchak, 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 like a pressure weapon where it sprays out this wire. But it is mentioned as a flechette, as if it were sharp metal pieces, but we also know that these are big enough, wide enough, or in enough of a line to literally bisect a human, like slice right through them in a couple of shots, and it could turn you into basically chunks with a couple of well-placed shots. So I think it probably has multiple alternate fires, maybe even multiple designs or ammunition cartridges, but it works like a big old revolver. Essentially, once one cartridge goes out, the weapon on their chest or on their back automatically cycles the next canister, so to speak, and then pressure either built up inside of their body or within the weapon itself will eject metal in some way that causes a good deal of damage. These don't have terrible range. They don't have terrible range. It's not great, and obviously it's controlled via mind impulse, so the accuracy's probably not great either. But they're accurate enough to be used, and they have a high enough volume of fire to be used pretty effectively. The other important thing about Luxotl, and I know I'm talking about them for a while, but the important thing about them, you can always smell them coming. They are described as having a very strong scent of crushed mint and rotten milk. And of course, their dens and hives and areas that they frequently inhabit will stink of freshly crushed mint and rotting milk. It's a very, very nasty smell, but it's, I like mint, but rotting milk, not so great. The use of blasters in the alt fire. So I already went over the alt fires and a little bit of the blasters. They can use them while hanging off the ceilings, off the walls. So the big thing with them is that they can climb or tunnel or get over areas. One other important thing about their physiology, they do produce slime, so while they are scaly, they are also like a lizard, a little bit more smooth than something that is perfectly scaled. And they produce a viscous slime, especially within water that helps them swim. But this viscous slime has also been noted as helping to decrease the damage of las guns against them, because it forms a protective layer over their body. It isn't super effective, but it can be the thing that saves the big muscly Loxodon from getting killed in a single shot, and sometimes the Imperial Guard prefer to use an auto weapon against them instead of a las weapon because of this mucus or slime layer. So, about the Flechette Blaster, can humans use them? Do humans produce them? I say that the Loxodon produce them themselves, and either power them themselves with like some sort of internal pressure or gas or breathing apparatus or something like that, or it just works best for them and other forces don't want to retrofit them, or the Loxodon don't want to share the technology. Again, they work as mercenaries, not necessarily bosom allies. Can humans use them? I think theoretically. And here's the reason I say theoretically. You might say, well, the Mind Impulse is specifically like something that's jammed into the Loxodon's head. How would you be able to use it if you were human? There is an example of a wired Mind Impulse unit connection with a regular human that can be pretty easily removed or changed, like the ones that the Flechettes can, because the Flechettes are usually only given to the adult Loxodon, while the juveniles usually have to make do with like arm blades or just their own claws and teeth. Now, on AX Cardinal, they have Strathids. Strathids are essentially big, well-plumed, pretty ostriches that are strong enough to be ridden by men, and those Strathids, they have a Mind Impulse connection between the bird and the rider. Literally a wire going from the temple of the human riding them to the temple of the bird, and that allows the rider to control the bird without touching it. Now you might say, well, there's plenty of Mind Impulse units in the Imperium. Most of them connect to giant war machines, or to ships, or to like really big technological pieces. The Loxodon, it's just a gun. It's essentially just controlling this thing's pivot with your mind and when it fires with your brain. So I think it's entirely possible for a human to modify this to their own use, and it would almost work like a shoulder cannon from the Predator. So, similar thing to that. That's my reasoning from that. Let's move on to the Rakghoul. So, we're getting to the end here, I promise. The Rakghoul, they are a bionic lizard raiders from the Kuranos Expanse. I put them as large and in charge because they're pretty darn big. They've got 8 legs. They almost look like grievers from the maze. They are really, really big and nasty. They have a hierarchy, but really their society is imperial, but based on raiding. They have a lot of metallic augments and modifications. They use a lot of human weapons, things like heavy stubbers, chain weapons, stuff like that, but it's grafted onto their bodies as bionics, usually. And the more up you get in the hierarchy, the more bionics you will have. They are reptilian, as I mentioned, but they also use Uvoth tech, and we'll talk about the Uvoth in the next thing, but the Uvoth tech is essentially something similar to Force weapons. They will have chaos-affected weapons of that type, but they will also use radiation weapons, including melee radiation weapons, like axes and such, and guns, and then they have metal shredder guns. So they don't have one here, but the metal shredder guns fire something similar to like a Tyranid weapon, but it is made of metal. So it's like a twisting length of barbed wire that they essentially fire out attached to a bullet, and it kind of just whines and whistles a little bit like the Flechette blasters, honestly. I was weirded out by how close and how cool those were. So, Rakghoul, very cool. I love this picture. It's like an armored Rakghoul with a heavy stubber. There is a version of their infantry weapons that is like a triple-barreled autogun. So yeah, there's a lot of cool options for them, and a lot of cool weapons. They do raid Imperial supplies and ships, and you can see their ships are actually pretty considerable in terms of size, but they are a minor Xenos empire, and they often get their absolute asses handed to them by things like Space Marines, so yeah, they're pretty powerful. They have a lot of really nice weapons. I would recommend using them in an RPG, if you wanted to. But look up on them. There's actually some decent lore. Strixus, my probably second or maybe third favorite Xenos species. They use stolen weapons. They are these kind of rat, dog-face looking guys here. They have lots of different options. So they have flesh spawn, which are essentially vat brutes. So you know the racks from the Dark Eldar, where they take a human being, or in their case a Dark Eldar, and they scale them up, mass them up, put them with a bunch of modifications and augments? That's exactly what vat brutes are, except vat brutes are incredibly stupid. Like, they are literally like single-minded servitors, where they will do one thing. You point them a direction and say kill, they will kill. You tell them to move a bucket from one area to another and fill it with dirt, they will do it. They're not very smart, they're not very dynamic, they're to a degree like single option servitors that humans use. But they are really big, really strong, and they are kind of flesh babies from the vat, and they can be modified very heavily by the Strixes. They use them as war beasts as well as just manual labor. The Strixes weapons that are unique, they have ghost or special phase blades and curse blades. The curse blades are kind of like psychic weapons. They're pretty similar to something like a force weapon, but they have some differences. They may just be like psychic weapons or some sort of demon or chaos weapon of some kind. The Strixes don't seem to fuck around with chaos all that much, so I doubt it's straight up chaos, but it could be psychically affected or psi-active. The ghost weapons are basically Catan phase blades. Like, the description is 1-to-1. It's just a Catan phase blade, but there are different versions of them that the Eldar and other stuff use. Again, it's something that disappears when it enters the target, reappears inside of the target, and then disappears again, killing them by, cutting their heart out or something without actually touching them. So, something like that. They also have the same exact thing for their ships. The ships are the Sibek, or the Sibek. This is essentially a bunch of ship corpses that the Strixes have strung together. How many of these are functioning, how many are not exactly clear. They arm them with super weird weapons because the Strixes do have their own technology that they kind of hoard for themselves, the best of the best. But these chained ships are super cool because the Strixes are traders at heart. They want to take stuff from you and give you stuff in exchange. The difference and the problem kind of is that the Strixes don't put the same value on objects as humans do. So when you're selling your ship, you might think that the most impressive part about it are the guns or the engine, and the Strixes is going to look around and be like, yes, the captain's chair, the most important part of this entire vessel. And he's going to be like, alright, yeah, cool, your guns are nice and all, but how much for this chair? So they're very business-like, but they just have weird rules on what is important to them. That's one of the reasons I love them, because using them as traders, they'll trade with anyone. They don't give a damn. You can see here he's got a Tau weapon. He's probably trading it to a Chaos Space Marine. He doesn't care. Essentially, it's maximizing profit. They're a little bit like Quark from Deep Space Nine, that kind of Ferengi mentality of maximize profit at all costs. And I love the Strixes a lot. These little funny bear guys are so useful in RPGs, because no one knows what they are until you reveal, oh my god, it's Strixes. But yeah, the chained ships are super cool. They do have a lot of unique technology, and often they will have a lot of weird stuff like archaeotech from way back in the day that they've been holding on to forever. The Yuvath and the Anathame. So let's do the Anathame real quick first. This is our boy, I believe it's Erebus, but it might be somebody else. These are from the Kinnenbracht, which are a species that I'm pretty sure isn't around anymore. But the Anathame is essentially an instant kill weapon. It literally just takes the soul and deletes it like the Emperor's mind bullets did to Horus's soul. So the Anathame, or yeah, the Athame or the Anathame, used to be one super special sword that the Kinnenbracht had. They had other ones that were similar, but the Anathame, capital, was one blade. It was shattered, and now there are a whole bunch of, like, knives. I think there's 3 that are Athames. These can cut through reality and do stuff like teleportation. They will essentially just be filled up with warp magic and bullshit like that. And, of course, they can still insta-kill people given a good scrape. I believe it does actually have to cut your skin. But the Yuvath, the cool boys, the ones who we don't really talk about because they're responsible for some weird stuff, and also they might be in the Astartes animation. They were like the Grell. They were a combined human and Xenos warp worshipping or warp utilizing empire. They have psi-active bone and crystal weapons, which, like you can see here, this kind of black, crackling energy and the living bone or the life-eating crystals are pretty indicative of Yuvath tech. And it is very much related to Chaos. Like, there's no bones about it. These guys were worshippers of the warp, not necessarily the gods, because, again, this goes back to my idea that humanity are the ones who cause the gods to be the gods, and that's why we're their primary worshippers, that's why we're the ones they want, because other Xenos worship the warp, but they don't worship the gods, and thus their chaos stuff and their warp stuff is different from the stuff that humanity produces, like the Yuvath tech. Now, it is chaotic. It is actively chaotic. Everything from their ships to their war beasts, all that stuff. They have crystal dogs, these kind of like spider-looking purple crystal dogs that can kill people, and also they can repair their ships and do stuff like the Necron little sentinel things. I forget what they're called. Why am I forgetting what they're called? Scarabs. They're like the scarabs. Bone Guardians, these boys, it's kind of an amalgam of living bone. Something that they've seen there, and this is also something that might be referenced in Astartes, again, something I'll go over if I go over that video, but I do full-heartedly support that notion. But these act as their, like, guardians. They're made out of dead flesh and dead meat, again, animated by this black chaos energy that is magnified through crystals. They have force weapons, again, psi-active force weapons. Not clear if the Yuvath themselves are psychic, but given their chaos affiliation, they probably are, let's be honest. They had some level of psi activity within themselves, which is why they were able to use force weapons as a major melee weapon. And then they're dark energy constructs. So you would refer to these as like this black dark energy crystal with crystals around it, and this thing that is forming the head of the kind of Bone Guardians. I think these are warp engines or possibly demon engines. Again, modified by Xenos using them instead of humanity, so they don't take on that same exact type. You know, chaos tends to apply itself differently when being used by different species on occasion. Especially when humans are around, and it's not the humans doing it. So, possibly demon engines, but most definitely these are warp engines. They are chaotically active constructs being powered by warp energy. Whew! Acknowledgements. So, we have a couple of things going up. This is a double upload, obviously, and that means that there's a new army vote coming after it. But most important thing is I have some options for you guys, and it's going to be a secondary vote. I want to know what you guys want to see for this channel. I'm going to put a couple of options up. The first one that immediately came to me is I want to get new channel art. For both my own profile and for the channel banner and all that stuff so that we can look a little bit more professional, you know. I wanted to know if you guys wanted to see any animation reviews or just more of the cycle, and I wanted to get a solid schedule down for maybe one either stream or video every 3 days. I think I can manage that. Obviously, this is a double upload, and I haven't uploaded in 4 days, roughly. 3 days, 4 days when this comes out, but still, I want to get your guys' opinion. I'm just going to post an opinion poll with a couple of options. Do you want new art? Do you want a different schedule? Do you want consistent streams? What do you guys want to see? And the thing that gets the most votes, and please comment. I do recommend that you comment on that one because I want people's more nuanced takes than just the votes. And yeah, we'll absolutely act on that. But either way, I wish you all a lovely good night.